Welcome everybody to today's webinar. We're calling this one Crossing the Line from Personal Trainer to Nutrition Coach or Registered Dietitian, the Risks and Realities. This is presented by Insurance Canopy, and today we're going to be discussing this nuanced topic of how well-meaning personal trainers may unintentionally cross that line into legal and insurance risk territory of actually acting as a nutrition coach. We're going to talk about some of the risks of that, some of those lines and tips and trips to avoid that. Today, we're joined by Chelsea Ramsey, a certified personal trainer, Tanya Bacci, who's a registered dietitian and owner of HungerBombCookies.com, and our resident insurance guru, Joanne Hammer, who's a program manager at Insurance Canopy. Following our panel discussion, our panel will take some questions from the audience. As a reminder, we cannot address insurance-specific or claim-specific questions, and nothing here should be construed as legal advice. This is more of an informational panel. But for those types of questions, we encourage you to reach out to a member of the Insurance Canopy team or our registered dietitian herself, Tanya Bacci, here for more specific questions, and they'd love to help out. Otherwise, please take your questions and drop them there into the chat, and we'll try to get to those at the end of our prepared discussion here. With that, I'd love to take a second to introduce some of our panelists. If you could just give us a little background on yourself. We'll start with you, Chelsea.
Yeah, my name is Chelsea. I am currently a copywriter for Insurance Canopy for the personal training and fitness products. But I'm also an ACE, American Council on Exercise certified personal trainer. And I have been training since about 2018, 2019, and have always been in the fitness world in some capacity, very active and everything. It was a whole bunch of things. So I did do an ACE functional fitness nutrition specialist certificate a few years ago as well.
Well, we really appreciate you lending your personal training advice to this one and acting as our operator out in the space and giving us that real world experience. Ms. Tanya, if you could jump in and give us a little background on yourself.
Thanks, Kyle. I hate to say it, but I've been practicing for over 30 years. And I started out in Ohio and ended up being a director of nutrition and wellness for a worldwide company and traveled the country. Then about 10 years ago, I started my own company, and it is private consulting to help people with their health needs, and actually a healthy baking company. So it's under the Hunger Bomb Cookies name. And I look forward to this today, helping people.
We appreciate it. And we're going to make sure to put Tanya's email address into the chat so you guys can reach out to her with any specific questions. She's got a wealth of knowledge that she's going to share with us today. And then finally, Joanne Hammer, if you could give a little intro on yourself, we'd appreciate it.
Thanks, Kyle. I have been in insurance for over 20 years with Veracity and Insurance Canopy for 9 years. The personal trainer program is one of my programs that I manage and have been a part of almost since its inception. And so I'm looking forward to this, but have a lot of insurance knowledge and information about claims and how to avoid claims for our personal trainers and fitness.
I think that's the goal here, right? Is avoid risk where at all possible. Awesome. Well, with that, I'd love to dive right in. So most of our audience today are probably from the personal trainer side of things. And we see a lot on social media. We see a lot in the personal training world about, helping with people's diets. It comes naturally. As a person who uses personal trainers, I understand the want to ask the question of what should I be eating? So I guess probably your area, Tanya, if you could start, can you give us a rundown of kind of the broad overview of a registered dietitian versus nutritional coach versus and what does that look like certification wise and just the overview of that field?
Sure. I think that the term registered dietitian is certainly a protected term. You have to attend a certified college. It's a 4 or 5 year degree with an internship. They did change it to a master's degree in the last few years. And then you take a national registration exam to be a registered dietitian. You have to maintain credit hours to keep that certification. So it's pretty strict, and it is a specific term. Not anyone can call themselves a dietitian or registered dietitian. The term nutritionist, I think, is more of a commonly understood term, but it's really not regulated. It's a general term that doesn't have any specific educational requirements. You can take a 1-week course and get a certificate in nutrition. It's just kind of a terminology that doesn't really hold necessarily a credentialing behind it.
Interesting. And so looking at, and does that vary throughout the states? I mean, is every state kind of strict on it, or where does that lie in terms of if I were to call myself a dietitian or a nutritionist?
Okay, so some states have licensed dietitians. There's an additional credentialing on top of being registered, which is a worldwide credentialing, not dissimilar from like a registered nurse. And so some states decided, Ohio is one of them, to become licensed because they felt that there was still a risk of either supplement stores or can be trainers and gyms and things like that, providing nutrition education that really crossed the line. So some states are licensed, they're very strict. You can't, there's legal repercussions for sure, and liabilities if you cross that line. You can still call yourself a nutritionist anywhere. That doesn't affect, it's more about what you're allowed to do if you're in a licensed state.
And so given this kind of legal ambiguity, I think a lot of our audience today, who are personal trainers, they live very healthy lifestyles. They've really kind of gotten their eating down to a science and understand the health landscape. Let me ask you this. In your professional opinion, what is kind of the risk, or what is the issue with sharing some of that knowledge, or claiming that taking that knowledge to become and start offering advice to their clients based off of what they know? Do you see any risks with that? Any issues, again, from your professional standpoint?
I do, because I think that, as a dietitian, I had a lot of biochemistry and medical background and disease and drugs and all this interventions that is important to what we do. So I'm not sure that whether it's, your neighbor or your mother or somebody's, a trainer, or somebody isn't even a certified trainer that's trying to help you with your weight loss or your diet or build muscle or whatever it is. I think that you may not have the background of someone from maybe what their risk factors are. So let's say, Kyle, you ask me like, I want to drop 10 pounds and da 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 da. Well, maybe I don't know that you're on hypertension medication. Maybe I don't know you're diabetic or have some other, intestinal or some other kind of disease. And so I could easily recommend a diet to you that would cause harm. I mean, it might interfere with your medication. You may have lab work that's a little bit out of whack and wonky. And then I put you on something like a keto diet that's really heavy in proteins and put stress on your kidneys. And there's just a lot of complications to changing someone's eating habits that I think it's almost like I don't think you're aware of how simple that can be, but how dangerous it can be. Does that help?
That's exactly the point. And preparing for this, I really hadn't thought much about it. And that's why I wanted to ask the question of, well, what's the risk in telling somebody to eat healthier or whatnot? Is not thinking as you would as a trained individual, what goes on in the body and the differences that those can make, that thinking, well, I think there's probably so many personal trainers out there who think, oh, this can't do any harm. But I think pointing out just a few of those examples like you did shows some of the risks associated with that.
Yeah. And people are private with their medical information. So I may be hesitant to share with you that my doctor has now diagnosed me with something or put me on something for blood sugar. And so, if someone's not forthcoming with you and you don't really understand the interactions, that's where the risk can come.
Totally. And so, Chelsea, you're kind of experiencing this on the other side. Can you give us any, insight? Is this something that you come across often in personal training? Is this something clients are asking for? Tell me about your experience of where you've been asked this question.
Oh, yeah, I have been asked all the time about, nutrition, diet, what do I eat? And I do have clients with, conditions, diabetes, other things that they have to take lifelong medication for.
Mhm.
But what we should all do, any certified personal trainer or anyone working with, and fitness and things like that, we always do a health history questionnaire beforehand. A popular one's called the PAR-Q. And that's mostly to find out if they are on medications that I might need to know about, or, if their doctor has uh, told them they, have a heart condition. They might not always tell you or remember the name of their medication. And it's not like I don't know all the specifics, but it's mostly to make me as the trainer aware if they have a condition that uh, maybe they need to go get medical clearance first before they do, or if they're on a medication that is known to uh, interfere with their like blood pressure, being like, okay, they might get lightheaded if we do too much of this or that, or like maybe we won't do a whole lot of up and down movement, stuff like that. Um, and then, I do get asked a lot about like, I want to lose this much weight, or I'm not losing any weight. How come I'm not losing any weight? Um, I specifically won't recommend things, especially when they have like, diabetes or other things, rheumatoid arthritis, that they have to take a lot of medication for. um, and within my scope of practice, we can generally do general. So I will talk to them about like general things. Like they ask me about a specific diet, I can talk about the pros and cons, or why I don't like it, or what things I do like.
Mhm.
um, but most of the time, if they're asking for specifics, I will refer out. So
How
kind of
did you
like
know?
the when in doubt, throw it out. When in doubt, refer out.
That's pretty good. And that's when did that, how did you know not to do that, I guess? Was that part of your training? Is that just like your inherent, you've worked in insurance, maybe you know risk? Why did you kind of put up this hard line and say, no, I can't do that?
Yeah, and I know I tend to be one of the I'm a little bit more of a stickler or for the rules or whatnot. I did take a fitness nutrition continuing education course early on in my fitness career. And through that class, I was like, oh, there are a lot of rules here. I don't even really want to touch it. Um, also because I live in Ohio, which is also a very strict state about what you can and cannot provide in terms of a personal trainer and all things nutrition. Um, I also have, worked in not just for insurance Canopy, but in other insurance settings. So it's something that's always been on my mind, but especially through that nutrition certification course, or not a certification, but the certificate. Um, that one really drove it home about how murky the lines can be, and then I just didn't think that it was worth it to cross the line, especially if there are things like I'm very upfront with my clients about what I do know and what I don't know. So I don't want to give them advice that's not actually going to work for them, or interfere with, other medical conditions. I'm there to help them get stronger for the most part. And when they feel they need extra help with their diet, we'll find someone to help them with that.
Well, I think we found the perfect panelist for this without even looking that hard, because risk averse is the idea here. I'm going to go over to Tanya. I guess Chelsea talked a little bit about this line, right? That there is perhaps some things that can be said, tiptoeing and then crossing. I'm wondering, can you give us any insight in your mind? I mean, we see a lot of meal planning, we see supplements, we see things like that. Can you kind of talk about where you think coming up to the line and then passing that line is?
Sure. I think there are some general guidelines that I'm sure Chelsea feels really comfortable, and probably most of the people on the call, as far as that have been tested and that you can get free, government information about the food pyramid and the Mediterranean diet. The My Plate, which is just a really easy way of looking at like what we would call a picnic plate, and each divider is so much protein, so much fruits and vegetables, so much starch. Fluid intake, you know, half your body weight in fluid. I think there are some general things that we know are safe and recommended. And those come with criteria though. You know, that's for the normal, healthy adult person that doesn't have any complications or medical conditions that would change that requirement. So I really think as long as you stay safe and you don't promise that you can do a customized meal plan or anything specific to any kind of medical condition. I think that's where the line crosses when you get into the specifics, the customization, the guaranteeing weight loss, the things like that. I think that's where you're going to flip to the other side of not being in your realm.
Interesting. So it's kind of like, am I generalizing or am I getting specific? And if I'm getting specific, I'm definitely tiptoeing, if not crossing.
Exactly. And I think the benefit is to be a successful trainer and a successful dietitian is to really have this great team of people that work together, because, you know, people are going to come to Chelsea to get strong and fit and maybe, you know, recover from certain things. And then they're going to ask her about weight loss and she's going to be able to say, oh, I've got somebody that could be really help you be really successful in that aspect. The same that she would refer to a physical therapist or a doctor or whatever. So I think thinking about that as a comprehensive team approach for your clients is really going to be the most successful for them and for you. And we want them to be successful. That's, you know, what we're here for.
Yeah, I think pairing the two, which is why we were so excited to have both of you here today to look at both of those perspectives. And I'm sure that we can talk about different ways at the end of working together from a monetary standpoint and business standpoint, but from a risk and actually providing service to your clients, it sounds like a really great way. One thing I wanted to hit on a little bit harder was, and again, I'm coming at it from a customer standpoint, is supplements. And I'm curious I mean, obviously from a registered dietitian dietitian standpoint, where do you see that? Do you see recommending or working with a company or even selling? Do you see that as a risk, an additional risk to crossing that line?
I do. I think that does cross the line because I think supplements aren't regulated very well. We don't always know the source, the safety, the concentration. And if you read any bottle of supplements, I mean, as simple as a vitamin C, you know, it'll say something on there about it's not been proven, you know, by research to fix any medical condition or whatever. That's paraphrasing. But I think that a supplement can be helpful to a lot of people, but if you don't know their medical condition and other things that they're on, then the risk can be huge. I mean, and as simple as something like a fat soluble vitamin, you know, that accumulates in the body and isn't really passed out every day like a vitamin C, things like that. I mean, you might know like, oh, well, I took ashwagandha and it made me feel blah, blah, blah. But you know what, that can be quite a risk if someone's on certain medications and maybe antidepressants or anti-anxiety. So I think, yeah, I would not go that route with being a spokesperson for a specific supplement. I think that crosses for sure into the dietitian or even physician realm.
I think one of the major takeaways from this that we'll probably hit home 100 times is that generalized versus personalized, right? And especially saying, well, hey, you should take this, probably easily crosses that line and opens up to risk.
Yes.
Before we dive into the insurance side and the risk and all of that, I did want to kind of differentiate or ask this question. We see a lot of, I think it was Chelsea who shared this phrase I hadn't heard, fitfluencers. I find that hilarious because it's so true. And I follow them. But tell me, do you see any risk or liability or ethical, dilemma with doing this on your social media, right? Because that does kind of seem like it's generalized. So maybe not personalized, but I guess either of you, but maybe start with Tanya and can ask Chelsea of her opinion. But do you see that is any issue that you might comment on?
I think it's so funny. It's so unregulated. So it's just kind of a free for all. And it makes me laugh sometimes because some of them are very entertaining, but I will tell you, I mean, and even chefs, nutritionists, dietitians, personal trainers. I mean, every once in a while, they'll just, start mixing concoctions and, drinking it and touting that it's going to do weight loss. And I saw one yesterday, I think it was vinegar and baking soda. And I'm thinking, oh my God, if you had acid reflux, that would just do you in, right? I mean, what a stomach upset that would create. So, I mean, I think that it's very dangerous. And I think that you're going to find people that will follow those unknowingly that there's any risks and then have issues from those. And so be very careful, I think, about, the latest trends or the latest TikTok or Instagram or something like that that's found some weird supplement or some tea or some mushroom thing, or I mean, you can't even make up the stuff that's out there now. It's so weird, and they're dangerous, and they can be dangerous. So shy of an upset stomach or vomiting or nausea or diarrhea, I mean, then you've got other things that are really can be much more dangerous. So yeah, I think that's crossing the line. So what do you think, Chelsea?
Yeah, that was one thing that I joke about the some kinds of fitfluencers being, my nemesis. But only in the sense that I've had, friends and people that I know and family members that will do workouts off of an Instagram influencer or something. They're like, I just did a workout I saw on Instagram, and I would be like, I'm right here. And then half of the time, I wish I was exaggerating, but it's at least that they would do that workout off of this person they saw online, and they'd hurt themselves. They're like, "Oh, well, I've pulled something doing that workout." So I was like, "Well, I'm here. I would, have loved to answer those questions, or at least you could have sent it to me to be like, what do you think of this? Do you think that would work for me?" Um, so from that standpoint, I also think so. It's not even just the supplements or other things that they might be selling. It goes for the actual workouts themselves. Um, I know because I know a couple people on the, figures or social media influencers that I do like, but they're also the ones who are very upfront about their credentials. Like I was like, okay, she talks about her master's degree and her PhD and her experience. So, and I like those. Those I will trust a little bit more, but again, it is the internet, so everything grain of salt. But I agree. You see some things and there's just a lot of noise. So
No,
I
that makes
also
total
think it's
sense.
full of risk.
And again, I think we're here talking about risk for this very reason. I certainly don't want us to scare the entire audience, right? But the whole point of this discussion is, well, there actually are two different specialties here, right? There are people who are trying to speak about different things, and to blend those is what is creating risk. And so let's dive into it from a risk perspective. And I'm going to bring in Joanne here because this is kind of her wheelhouse. Is Joanne, I guess start us off with, I've always heard of insurance as the purpose of insurance is to mitigate risk or pass that risk to others. But I guess when it becomes a little muddy is when it becomes a concern. So I guess would you start us off with what kind of insurance policy should a personal trainer have? And then we can talk about what happens when we start to muddy that line.
Okay. So basic insurance for our personal trainers, a professional liability is the absolute most important insurance. If you have to really just pick one due to budgets or whatever, professional liability, that is the liability for your services. If you give incorrect instruction, somebody is injured because of your instruction, that's what's covered. That's the biggest risk that personal trainers generally face. That's most of the claims that we pay. They have to do with lifted too much weight, did an exercise that was beyond their ability. So I think professional is number one in the list if I had to order it. General liability would be right underneath that. And most insurance policies for personal trainers, including the one that we offer, combines professional and general together. So that's what your preferable insurance product should look like, are those two combined. Your general is when someone trips and falls over a mat or a kettlebell that's been left in their way. Break a mirror at a gym where you're training, but you're not an employee, so that you may have to cover the cost of those damages to that gym or studio where you're working. Slips, trips, and falls. You've got people that are sweaty water bottles that have condensation on the outside. That's a really easy thing you might not think that you're liable for, but if it is your client that you've brought into that space, that gym or studio may not be responsible for those kinds of injuries. So your general liability kind of marries perfectly with your professional to cover both of those incidences. Some other coverages that I think are important: product liability. We've talked about this a little bit with Chelsea and Tanya. If you sell a product, especially a white label product that you buy it from someone else and sell it as your own product, if you recommend a product, such as vitamins, supplements, even a meal service, that if your client is injured because of those products, your general and professional liability oftentimes won't cover that product. They'll only cover products that you use during your service. So anything that leaves your training session and it is intended for your customer to be used on their own is not going to be covered under your general liability or your professional liability. So product liability is important. If you take payments over the internet with your phone, any way, your data can be hacked and your client's data can be captured, and we have a data theft problem. So that protects your customers' data as well as your reputation. And then I think the final one that I would want to hit on for personal trainers is equipment and tool coverage. So, you guys invest a lot into your training, to get your certifications, staying up on the latest fitness trends, and but you may not think about how much money you actually spend on your equipment just to get you to the point where you can start having clients. That could be your computer, where you make your workouts. It could be your phone, where you communicate with your clients. So tools and equipment, that's anything that you use in your business that you can pick up and take with you to a studio, a gym, or to your client's own home where you train.
I appreciate that. So all of that said, everybody should be carrying these things. I think that's why we're here as insurance. But I think let's talk about, say I live in a state that's maybe loose about it. I say, I listen to this and I say, you know what, forget it. I'm still gonna say, hey, Mr. Client, you should eat this every 3 days and whatnot, and hoo-ha. Would any of those policies cover that? I mean, what they say about insurance is about being sued, right? And people can sue for anything. But if my trainer says, well, why aren't you eating 2,000 grams of protein a day, which I know is absurd, but something like that, I'm open to a lawsuit. Tell me where insurance would step into that, and what would as a claims adjuster, I don't know if that's called, but what would you say to that?
So I think the key point, and both Tanya and Chelsea have shared this, is stay within your certification and your training. And insurance really follows that rule also, as well as, are you following your state, local government guidelines too? So if you're acting outside of what your business license might be, these are things that can cause a claim to be denied, because if I buy a personal trainer policy and I'm giving nutrition and dietitian advice, that's not what my insurance policy was meant to cover. I'm only, as the insurance company, going to cover your fitness services. And fitness services aren't defined as nutrition, counseling, and dietitian. So generally a claim for a nutritional error in advice would not be covered. So you could be left paying lawsuits, paying lawyers to defend yourself in this suit, And if your client was injured, potentially hundreds of $1,000s to your client if they win a settlement against you.
And I think that that's why we're having this session, right? Is to kind of show this gray area, but while it might seem gray to people out there, it's actually a little bit more black and white when you're looking at it from a risk, insurance, legality, even ethical standard standpoint. Is there is kind of no-nos here. I'll turn it back to you, Tanya, to I assume you have to carry your own type of insurance, right? And is that part of what, when working with your clients, you're contracted to do that kind of thing?
I do. It's interesting. I have professional liability insurance as a dietitian for my consulting and my health side. And then I have the flip insurance for my food license, for my cookies and the things that I make and sell at the market. So yes, because they don't cross over. The food license liability does not cover anything that I do as a dietitian. And then my professional liability insurance is for my one-on-one counseling. So it is, you do have to, get the right insurance for the right product that you're giving a client. Yeah.
And that I appreciate that. And that's, again, I think creates the distinction between the two and the need for perhaps a dual relationship. So let's talk as we kind of wrap this up. I think this is, we've effectively scared our audience to understand that this is a risky proposition. So let's talk about it. What can you do, right? On a positive note, maybe we start with you, Chelsea, is you kind of started to hit on this. Do you have any tips about how to work with clients who want to know this information? They turn to you, you are their resource, they've hired you to make them better or whatnot. Can you give us any tips for our audience?
Yeah, I mean, I know we've probably said it a couple times, but general, if we keep it generalized, I know that I give them like these are the well established or accepted, like Tanya said, like safe things, like generally speaking, this is what is recommended. Like for, there's a certain amount of grams of protein per day per pound of muscle, that kind of thing. But I always, preface things by saying like, this is the standard recommendation. But again, everybody is different. So, you might need something more or less or a little bit different. Just like I tell them that the recommended number of minutes of activity per week is like 150 minutes of activity. So especially when I've got new clients who come from being sedentary, I'll be like, well, our first goal is to get to that 150. And we'll kind of do that with their nutrition as well. Here are some of the basics that you could potentially try. But if you want more specific, again, and then I will, the gym I used to work at used to have somebody in the building that we could work with, but that was several years ago. So now I don't have a specific nutrition person now. But there are, like Tanya said, some government websites like MyPlate, or if they just want to, sometimes I'll have them start just a food journal when they don't understand why they can't lose any weight because they think they're doing everything right. And I'm like, well, a lot of times, they think they're eating really well, but the food journal a lot of times is the like hard wake up call because you have to put everything down. Like, oh, the creamer in my coffee doesn't count. Yes, it does. So, they have to write literally everything down, and that might make them be like, that might help them make their own changes, but you didn't tell them what changes to make, but they can find for themselves. Another phrase that I like to use is model, don't sell. So, like, here's some examples of how to make things healthier, or replacements that you could use in meals, or like, this is what I like to do. You can take any of these and see if any of these work for you. But any more specific than that, and I don't really go too much further than that.
I love it. Tanya, what would you share to our personal trainer audience, and really any advice on maybe where they could just generalized advice, again, going to that generalized, not personalized now?
I love that. I think that, like we talked before, just she's saying like the My Pyramid, the Mediterranean diet, the My Plate, general fluid protein recommendations, just, generalized. But I think also the thing that we didn't really discuss is like if Chelsea needs a handout, right? As long as the handout is made by a registered dietitian with some great suggestions and guidelines, then that would be something that she could hand out to her client. So it's really, if it's prepared by a dietitian and it meets your general guidelines that you want to give to your client, that maybe one's about general weight loss, maybe one's about general cardiac health or whatever. I think that's a great pairing that's available too. So, know that we're a resource for you too. And Chelsea, when you said you don't have a dietitian to refer to, now you do. So, and then I think recipes. I think that I'm a culinary dietitian. I'm certified in adult weight management, but it's so interesting that the way that I live and the way that I help people is just with some really fun swaps, healthy swaps to still eat the things that you want to eat and love, that are delicious to keep you healthy. So, I don't think anything's off of the table as far as some people have a list of yes and no's and this is allowed and this is not allowed. I'm just not that way. I'm much more of a flexible person that if you love Mexican food, I can teach you how to do it in a really healthy way and make healthy choices. So yeah, I said, keep it general, keep it fun. If people have specific health related goals that they want a customized meal plan, they want to lose 20 pounds for something in 5 months, that we can work with them. And I think that the only way people are going to get healthy is to have both a personal trainer and a dietitian, because I think I'm not successful without you and you're not successful without me. So I think it's just the perfect, and then we need the right insurance, don't we? So yeah.
I love the plug. And speaking of that, so, again, kind of a personal trainer audience, obviously, I think everybody here should just go work with you, Tanya, but how would a personal trainer find and select a partner to recommend, right? I'm sure there's a whole gamut of types of people out there that they charge, how great they are or not. Can you give any insights for green flags, red flags, and looking for a partner as a registered dietitian or nutritionist?
Well, I like to do, like I would say from a personal trainer standpoint, I usually do like a 15-minute call with people just so they can kind of get the sense of what my style is and I can get the sense of what they're looking for. And then you can say like, well, I think we'd be a good partner, because it's, it's not different than a therapist or than a doctor. You have to have the right personality to work together. So I think, reaching out to them, trying to get to know them, seeing their style, if it fits in with what you're trying to do with your clients. And maybe you approach it from a personal standpoint. Maybe Chelsea and I talk for 15 minutes and she struggles with, I'm going to make up some stuff, Chelsea. So you really like sugar and, your weakness is that you're having a tough time staying away from the sweets and stuff like that. So, and your diet's low in protein. So, we can work together to try to add some things to help your diet be a little more balanced and give you some healthy alternatives for the things that you struggle with. So I think it is getting to know the personality of the person, Kyle. And I think that's probably the best way I can tell you to do it. But somebody should be willing to talk to you at no cost, and then you can work with each other and decide if that's a good fit, because they would love to have that relationship with the trainer.
Awesome. Well, actually, that took us to the perfect 40-minute mark. We've got a few questions I want to get to here before we close out. Anything else anyone from the panel would like to add that we haven't touched on before we dive into the Q&A?
Well, I think I have one quick, as I'm listening to people talk to our panelists, I think we see a lot personal trainers that feel like I had my client sign a waiver and so I don't need insurance. Chelsea recommended a great one. From the insurance perspective, we always recommend waivers. Make sure that your client has the doctor's consent to participate, and that when it's time to refer out to a physician, a dietitian, or a physical therapist. So, you just really wanted to hit on that little topic of waivers. Is every time get a waiver. It can help you protect yourself, but it is definitely not a replacement for insurance.
Interesting. That's a good point. I bet that was in the notes. We didn't talk much about waivers. But good point. And based off the cost, not that I'm a personal trainer, but I've been on your website, based off the cost, I wouldn't think it's that big a cost to go ahead and carry the appropriate insurance.
Right.
Awesome. Well, with that, we've got a few questions here I want to jump into. And I'll probably either point them to you if I think, or please, anybody feel free to jump in. And to our audience, please drop any questions into the box here. We've still got a little bit of time. This first one, I think is a very fair point. It seems like everyone is doing this. How do I explain to, I assume by this, it means offering nutrition advice when they maybe shouldn't be. How do I explain to a client that I can't do this without sounding like I don't know what I'm doing or losing them? I'm wondering if you guys have any advice. That must be frustrating, right? When you've got so many personal trainers out there kind of towing this line. Maybe either Chelsea, Tanya, any thoughts on how to help this person realize that they're trying to do it right?
Yeah. I get that feeling because sometimes admitting, well, even saying like, I don't know that, like the fear of sounding like you don't know what you're doing, even when you do. I am always really super upfront with my clients and honest, be like, well, I will just tell them straight up, like, that is not within my scope of practice. Or I'm like, yeah, I know everybody does it, but technically, that's not something I'm supposed to be doing. But here are some recommendations that I like to look at, or, like the sources, like Tanya said, actual sources from the people with the right certifications. I'll send them there. Um, and I will tell them that I will be honest, like that's not something that for legal reasons, I will tell them that's why. It's not because I don't know. It's just that legally, uh, I can also use the state that I live in if I really need to like punch it home, because the state of Ohio is generally very strict about who's allowed to offer nutrition services, and it's usually only a registered dietitian. So um, that's how. I don't know if that's going to be good enough of an answer.
I can imagine it's frustrating, but
Yeah.
to Tanya's point, which I think it was so important that she joined this to share, there are risks. I think that I've learned through this that didn't even think about, right? I don't have some of these health things, so I was like, oh, who cares? But to say to a client, and I'm making this up, but to say to a client, look, I don't know your health. I don't know what could interact. I think I've learned from that like that I'd rather hear that as a client.
Yeah.
Than go ahead, right, Tanya?
Yeah. I think that's a great approach, because I think it's only natural that people feel uncomfortable saying they don't know. I think that's a difficult thing as a professional to admit to a client. So I think if you come from the standpoint of, I want to help you to be the best you can be from a physical standpoint in what I'm trained to do. But it sounds like you would really benefit from someone that has more of a specialized knowledge that can help you from a nutrition and a health standpoint. I would never want to take the risk of harming you in any way without knowing. So I think it's really, your intention's good. You want to help them, and you think the best way that you can help them be successful is to get somebody that can help them in this aspect of their healthcare. So I think taking that route, and they've got to appreciate that. You've got to appreciate somebody that's looking out for your well-being. Yeah.
That's definitely what I lean on when I know the client who is asking does have a condition, like either if it's type 1 or type 2 diabetes, whatever. I've had several people ask me there, or who, are like, I had a heart surgery, or, something. I will say, I think from what you're telling me, I think that you're going to do better, or that you would benefit more from a dietitian.
Yeah.
I can give you general advice. I can't give you something personalized and specific for what you need. But yeah.
Yeah, when in doubt, scare with the risk. No,
I try not to be like scary. Just to, drive home. This is going to be more beneficial for you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, here's another one. I know I said at the beginning we're not going to answer specific insurance questions, but maybe you can answer this one, Joanne. Does my regular insurance, I'm assuming as a personal trainer, cover me if I post my training tips on Instagram or TikTok?
So it does. It should. I don't know what insurance company that you're with. If you're with Insurance Canopy, I can tell you for certain that we will cover online training sessions, whether those are Zoom calls similar to this or content that you've created and posted. There are things that you'll want to do to protect yourself when you do that. Make sure that people understand that, they need to have their doctor's consent to start an exercise program, that they need to be aware of their physical abilities and look for modifications or request modifications from you if the exercises seem too difficult or outside of their abilities. And so while it definitely is covered for you to be an online trainer and for you to post workouts, you definitely want to protect yourself with some of those disclaimers in each of your videos and every time that you post anything or do an online workout.
When in doubt, waiver disclaimer note, I think it's good.
I know that it's not in the chat, but that did, or I can't see the chat, but that did make me think, Joanne, I personally don't do Instagram and TikTok for my fitness. I just work at, my gym. But those disclaimers, the like these are just tips. Always do to your own ability levels and everything. Should they be saying that out loud in the video or in the caption? Does it matter? Do they have to do both? What?
Both is always best. I scrolling across the bottom of all your workouts if you need it to be. But definitely, I do think you start out your videos, your workouts with that disclaimer. I'm not there in person to correct your form or whatever. And then yes, always with anything that you post.
No, it's a great addition, Chelsea. Thank you. I thought this was interesting based off of what we just said before. This person says, I never use language like I recommend or you should try. But I always say this worked for me. Do you think that that's a good way to avoid the risk? I just thought that was interesting. Any thoughts? I mean, I think you're tiptoeing the line.
I don't think it's a way to avoid the risk personally. I think that if you are testifying that you're using something that worked for you, that's endorsing it. That's supporting it. So I think it's still crossing the line. I don't think you're going to be protected. I don't know what, not sure what Joanne thinks about that.
Again, it's a rather specific example. I just thought it was interesting. They're trying to
Yes.
work around it as best possible.
Yeah.
This is another
I don't know
one.
if there are more disclaimers around that phrase that you can put, like, the whole, this is what I liked, but this was me. You might be different.
Yeah.
Like if it's just in conversation, I don't know if that will turn into something, like burden of proof. You're like, well, they didn't tell me that. Yes, I did. I don't know how that goes, but if you add the extra, like, I'm only speaking for myself, this is what I liked to do, your case might be different. I don't know if that makes it any different. The phrasing.
When in doubt, refer out. What is that? Is that what you said? Something like
Yeah.
that? Yeah. This one is another when in doubt. So if a client asks about a diet, intermittent fasting or keto, can I explain how those works, or is that too far as well?
I think that you can explain the premise of a diet. You can say intermittent fasting is a type of eating where you allow 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours between your last meal and your first meal. Some people find that helps reduce their total calorie intake in 24 hours. So, and then you can say, for example, you would stop eating at 6 at night and then you would not eat till 10 in the next morning, like just to give them an example how it works. I don't think that's crossing the line, because you're not telling them that's what they should do. You're just explaining the premise of a diet. Keto, it's a restricted carbohydrate diet that's very high in fat. It's, I mean, you could just explain the premise of it. It really does restrict a lot of carbohydrates and nutrients and fruits and vegetables. And, it's very restrictive. It's very difficult to stay on for the long haul. So, I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's okay.
Pros and cons of those
Yeah.
diets, like here's some benefits they might have, or here are the groups the studies have shown they benefit, or something like that. Those are things we could talk about.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that is all the questions we had. I dropped Tanya's email into the chat here, as well as it should be posted where you're seeing this if you didn't join us live today. I really, really, really want to thank our panelists, Chelsea, Tanya, Joanne. I think this was a fantastic discussion. A little, it may have felt a little negative, but there's a reason for this, is that, again, Tanya's trained for her area, Chelsea's trained for her area. Potentially working together is the best thing here to protect everyone in this risk scenario. So again, thank you to our panelists. Really appreciate the time and effort. And yeah, thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.